And now, I'm privileged to introduce to you Dave Yoho, our keynote speaker for today's event. At 16 years old, Mr. Yoho found himself serving as a U.S. merchant marine aboard a T-2 tanker supporting combat ships in the South Pacific. When the war ended on August 15, 1945, it was 4 days prior to his 17th birthday. Mr. Yoho is a successful businessman and a proud veteran of World War II who has spoken at numerous Memorial Day events and contributes tirelessly to the cause of his fellow merchant mariners. He recently took part in a special ceremony at the U.S. Capitol where he and his fellow World War II merchant mariners were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their crucial service during World War II. Mr. Dave Yoho.
I want to thank you all for coming here today. To us, this is a holy place. This is a place which is significant of our history, what we were and what we became. And in the few minutes I have today, I want to familiarize you with a couple of points here and explain why these are so important to your history. I urge the young people here today, I urge you to seek more of this history. I want you to notice that when that flag passed and when our national anthem was played, we observed the dignity and the sacrifice of all the people that preceded us, because this is our country. We respect it and don't expect us at any time in our life to have coincidence or understanding of the athlete who will kneel at a public program, or those who profane our flag or the dignity of what this country was and what it shall become. So let me take you back to where, thank you very much. Let me take you back to where we came from. The average gentleman you see here, including myself, was born usually just slightly previous to 1928. 1928. 1929, the stock market failed, Black Friday. 1933, 4 years later, the banks failed. Those of our parents, our grandparents lost their homes, their savings. And we went into one of the greatest depressions that the world has ever experienced. And when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, we had just emerged from a depression. And then I ask you to assess where we were and how old we were. We recruited 16 million, as you've said, put them in uniform. 16 million, 12.5% of our population. As you walk down these aisles, observe these panels that you see here. They're called bas-reliefs. They're done in bronze. They celebrate the greatest generation, which included the women. We went to war, and the majority of those who went to war were men, but there were women there too, I understand. But the women at home stood in for all the things we had to do. And so, President of the time, President Roosevelt, you'll only remember him, I'm sure, looking at you, by reputation in history. He ran for 4 terms. He never fulfilled the 4th term. But in 1938, we were not yet in the war, but the war in Europe was raging. And he decided to create something called the Merchant Marine Act. Now, as an explanation of where we served, there were 250,000 of us that were recruited to eventually serve in the Merchant Marine. Let me tell you how it works. In this 1938, the Merchant Marine Act created 3 training stations, one in California, one in Florida, and one in Sheepshead Bay, New York. And we conscripted young people. We conscripted people like myself. I was 16. And there were, don't leave now, ma'am, I'm going to get better. We were 16, and I want you to look at today, look at yourself, and look at your family. What do 16-year-old people know? What did they understand? And how did it come about that we put 16-year-old people into service? It came about because we suddenly found out we didn't have enough ships and not enough men. So the Merchant Marine Act, the Merchant Marine has been a facility that has existed since the Revolutionary War. The wartime Merchant Marine was created, and the United States Maritime Service, represented here today, was put into activity, and they created these 3 training stations, and then they created Kings Point. And you saw our flags pass before you here. You saw the triumphant feeling of those people who are from Kings Point. There's a young cadet from there today that came up and introduced himself earlier. We fly a battle standard from our flag at Kings Point, the only one of the Academy's privileged to do so. And the unwritten story that you may not know anything about. When you graduate from the U.S. Maritime Service Academy, you first of all complete 3.5 years before you get your commission, and then you're sent to sea for 6 months, and then come back and receive your commission. But you see, in wartime, these young men, they were called cadets, mostly under 20 years of age, went to sea. 142 of them never came back. Now, my service, called the United States Maritime Service, U.S. Merchant Marine, is called the little-known service. There were 250,000 of us recruited. There are less than 1,500 of us alive today. And I say this to all veterans. Get an opportunity to know us and touch our flesh. We will not come this way too often again. 400 of us die every day. And this place is a hallowed sanctuary for what we feel and what we think. And we say nothing in this world can take that away from us. But now what's the other part of the story? The war ends in 1945. You heard I was 16 years of age, 4 days after that war ended. Still a child. We came home broken in heart and spirit. We came home to a country that didn't understand where we had been. Despite the fact that you raise our flag and you thank us for your service, we understand that. Then we say, find out our history. I want to lead you to a piece of history of the U.S. Merchant Marine. As you walk around this side, you'll see in the flowing water area, and I'm pointing now where it says Atlantic, you will see there the Merman's Run. The Merman's Run is one of the greatest disasters in naval history. In 1942, 7 months after the war began, we put together the largest convoy that ever existed in American naval history, 35 ships laden with $1 billion in cargo. That would be the equivalent of $5 billion today. And they set sail from Reykjavik, Iceland, and they were headed to the North Atlantic. And these 35 ships were surrounded by 24 combat ships, submarines, and aircraft, because we were sailing into hostile water. And they went to some place called the Barents Sea. Pains me to tell you this. Look at that monument and then hear these words. The Barents Sea, at that time of the year, has a water temperature of 45 degrees below zero. You hit that water, you got 4 minutes. Thereafter, you have hypothermia and you don't make it. And in the midst of that convoy, sheltered and guarded by the combat ships, a British admiral, Lord Pound, made the observation it would be best to pull away our combat support because in Oslo, Norway, the largest battleship in the world was there, the Tirpitz, and they were afraid of that coming out. So they pulled away the combat support for these ships. Now, these ships, we had a crew of merchant mariners, and we had a group called the Armed Guard, supplied by the Navy, and we're pulled away. And now I want you to think of those young sailors on those merchant ships who knew they were going to die because you can't make it in that water. And when it was over and the Germans attacked, there were 11 ships left. That's all that were left. You didn't get that in your history book in high school or college. Why don't we rant for the truth to understand what these people, what those people I represent did? And from that comes an understanding of what we were called to do. Do you understand that when a plane took off to bomb Japan, that the head man, the head pilot, was probably 23 years of age, and they called him boss? Now I want to take you to 1943, which is the second worst disaster in the career of the U.S. Maritime Service, U.S. Merchant Marine. And you probably never heard of this either. Bari, Italy, on the Adriatic, a port where the cargo ships and the tankers went in to unload. And on a day in June of 1943, 105 German attack Stukas flew in to that port, supported by 24 full-scale bombers flew into that port. Now, in that port were 30 ships. The harbor was so crowded that when a cargo ship is unloaded, here's the pier, here's the ship. But in this case, there were so many ships, they had to park what we call a thwart ship, side each other. And in the belly, in the cargo of one of those ships, was 100 tons of mustard gas bombs. You have to search far and wide to hear this, but it's a matter of common knowledge today, and no one on that ship knew that cargo. That cargo was requisitioned by General Montgomery, a British general, who felt that the Germans might someday exercise warfare by using chemicals. But the planes took that ship out. And when that ship was hit, it was tied up to two other ships. Now, we attended services one time where a man who was on the ship I'm naming right now, where he escaped. But the only reason he escaped, he had been on liberty that night, and when he came back, they didn't allow him into the port area. Because you see, when that ship got hit, it disintegrated. I don't mean it was bombed and sunk. It was disintegrated. Now, I'm telling you a story of that you may never hear, and I ask you to look it up. Bari, Italy, often called Second Pearl Harbor or Little Pearl Harbor. 1,000 military, merchant seamen, and civilians died that one day, but that wasn't the end of it, because mustard gas is also implosive. And this great cloud surrounded the area of that harbor, and everyone who took a breath, everyone who inhaled the fumes of disaster. So we lost thousands. We lost thousands. We lost thousands. So I ask you today, and all you do to search our history, take the time to meet us, know us, and we thank you all for being here. And we ask you to remember just a couple things about us. There are just a few of us left. It ain't easy getting ready to come here. These people travel great distances to come here. To see a man that was in a prison camp, there's no way for you to know or understand what he was doing or what he was subjected to. And here is a gentleman over here was in 3 wars. He didn't give up after the first one. He went to the second and the third. And from these 3 wars, he takes a history. And where will our history be concerned? They don't teach it in your schools. They don't teach it in your university. And God bless me, I'm a Christian. They don't teach it in the churches either. But if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I want to share with you something, so it's not all gloom and doom. I hold in my hand the Congressional Gold Medal. This is the largest award that Congress can issue. And last week, on the 18th, I received this medal, as did some of my fellow World War II mariners. This medal says, we thank you. The people who gave it to us repeated, we are sorry it took so long. You see, when the war ended, my group was not in the GI Bill. We were left out. It was an accident. Everybody agreed that it was a mistake. That was 1945 when we found out we weren't in the GI Bill. And they rectified it in 1988. 43 years after the war ended, they gave us the GI Bill of Rights, which gave us the right to buy a house. I want you to think of it. I was 61 years of age, and I'm a youngster compared to some of these guys. But we take nothing away from that. We say, this is our country. We stood. Every one of these people stood and took an oath. And we took an oath to represent our country, to protect our country. And the Merchant Marines fought on 5 continents. Everywhere we fought, they were there. We delivered 15 million tons of war material to Europe. We delivered 13 million tons of war material and troops to the South Pacific. We delivered 8 million tons to the Mediterranean and 5 million tons to Russia. And with it all, then, we took a part of our life, our youth. We gave up our youth that no longer existed. So as I wrap up today, and I ask you to search out these pieces of history, because today with the internet you can find all these things, I want to leave you with something that I used when I received this medal. I was the spokesman for everyone who received this medal. I'm honored to be their spokesman. I'm honored to know these guys. We come from different walks of life, from different places in the world, but we are brothers. And this place makes us understand what others mean. And so when I received this medal, I took time to thank everyone, and this is how I end. I say I want to take you back 200 years in the way we called our children to war. This is in Britain, in England, in Scotland, where the law was at the wars at the time were prefaced. And the army came into the town and stood in the village square, and they played the bagpipes. They played a skirl on the bagpipes to draw attention to the fact that all men of military age were going to be conscripted on that day. And so there was a hymn written about it. It is called London Derriere. It appears in about 57 hymnals. Unfortunately, it's in Gaelic. But in 1910, a barrister in England created the words which I'm going to give you now, which open to a song called Danny Boy. And if you hear the frame of Danny Boy and the pentameter at which it is sung, it's a father saying goodbye to his child that he may never see again. And so it starts in the brogue, oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are dying. 'Tis you must go, and I must bide. And that's the way we were sent to war. And then the day the war ends. And the day the war ended for me was August 15th, 1945. We were first called. We broke radio silence and told us. And they told me 4 days later, I would turn 17. I want you to think about what youngsters know and what they don't know. We are the youngsters that they talk about. And so as that song ends, there's a lamentation, a prayer. And now I have taken the liberty of paraphrasing the words. But here's my ending to you. But should I return when the guns of war have silenced and I am dead, as dead I well may be, please come and find the place where we are lying and kneel and say an Ave, a prayer for us. And we shall hear the soft tread above us, and on our tombs will soft and warmer be, if you're not fail to tell us that you honor us. Then we will sleep in peace for all eternity. And so when you're with others and they say, where were you today? Tell them about the World War II Memorial. Tell them about those that sat with you today, those that braved the heat of that sun, and tell them about these people who directly or indirectly gave solace and sanctuary. And then say to them, say to the people you meet, we gave up our yesterdays for their tomorrows. God bless you.